Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Developing Mental Toughness webinar brought to you by your Vanderbilt Alumni Association. I'm Drew Webb, Assistant Director of Student Alumni Engagement, and I'm so glad that you could join us today from wherever you are. This webinar is one resource of many that Vanderbilt provides to our alumni, so be sure to familiarize yourself with the additional services that we offer at vuconnect.com/career. Today's webinar will last around 45 minutes with time at the end for questions. Please feel free to type questions as you have them into the question box on the side panel of your screen throughout the presentation, and we will make sure that these get addressed before time is up. We are recording today's webinar and we'll post it on the Expert Advice webpage and VU Connect, and we'll also share the link with you via email. Our presenter today, Brian Lomax, is a Vanderbilt alumnus, class of '89, and an expert in training mental skills. He received his master's degree in counseling psychology from the University of Missouri, and he is a sports psychology consultant for several athletic teams at Bryant University, Holy Cross College, and Boston College, as well as the New England Academy of Tennis. Brian also works privately with athletes, and they have enjoyed success at local, collegiate, and national levels in a variety of sports, including tennis, golf, football, volleyball, basketball, softball, field hockey, and figure skating. Through this training, Brian's students have not only become better competitors, but they have also learned the character skills necessary for leading a fulfilling life. A competitive tennis player since the age of 8, Brian transformed his own mental game in his 30s and achieved a career best ranking of #2 in the US in the men's 35 and over singles category. For more information about Brian and his products, you can visit his website, performancextra.com. Brian, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you, Drew, and thank you to everyone who's in attendance. I've been excited to do this webinar for a while. When we talk about developing mental toughness, most people think of that term in terms of athletes, but in reality, if we think about why we all should be doing some sort of mental toughness training, is life is performance, just like sports, and so we want to make sure that we are training this aspect of performance that is extremely important. So why do this? I think, when you start to look at performance, as you get good at something, you generally reach a certain level where your skills may not be getting any better. You may see a slowdown in improvement. You may reach a plateau. And to push through that plateau, very often it's all about taking your mental game and your emotional game to another level. I'll often ask athletes how much of their sport do they believe is mental. And the better the athlete, the better the performer, the higher that percentage is. And if you think about it, it's a lot because when you're in competition, everybody's pretty much at the same level physically, but what separates them from being able to win and not being able to win is their mental game. So we often see performance as 80 to 90% mental, and that really carries through not just in sports, but all performance categories. But then if you look at the amount of training that goes into that, it's not as intentional as it should be, right? I'll ask someone, well, how much time are you spending on training that mental game? And it's not 80 to 90% of the time. It's probably closer to 0% of the time. And I think part of that is because we often think about mental toughness as something that you're either born with or not, right? We haven't looked at it so much as something we're able to train. And we now know that that's not correct. It is extremely trainable. So we want to make sure that we are training that most important aspect in an intentional way with a vision of helping all of you perform whatever you do with more confidence, giving you the ability to succeed more under pressure or in stressful situations, and really come to learn to love what you do. I think that's obviously an important aspect of living a fulfilling life and doing purposeful things is actually enjoying what you do, and certain people don't always enjoy that, right, because of how they may view the challenges and stress that come along with whatever it is that they do. So what does it mean to be mentally tough? Sometimes I think it's actually good to understand what mental toughness is not when we are trying to understand this question or answer this question. When mental toughness, when we think of this, sometimes the word tough gets in the way, right? And if we have this vision of what toughness is, it's very often, someone who is perhaps very emotional, someone who is a fighter out there, um, maybe almost a sort of testosterone-based response to whatever we do. And I think we get a lot of that from our sports in our culture, whether that be football or hockey or basketball, these contact sports where we see, toughness being very overtly displayed. But the reality is that that's the exact opposite of what mental toughness is, right? When I ask athletes what do they think mental toughness is, I get a variety of responses that are all correct. Some people talk about how it's emotional control. Others, it's about being able to perform your best under pressure. Confidence is something that comes up. Self-belief, the ability to be fully focused. And all those things are true because mental toughness in itself is a very big term. It's an umbrella term. And, in our webinar today, I'm going to throw a lot at you. I am going to give you some takeaways, but this is such a big topic, it's hard to cover, in 45 minutes. So mental toughness, it is this big term, and I like to break it into 3 high-level components. And this first one may sound a little bit funny, but philosophy and mindset, character skills, behaviors and actions. And even though I haven't depicted the visual this way, this really is kind of a foundational piece. The philosophy and mindset really should be on the bottom, followed by character skills, and then ultimately the behaviors and actions that we need to be mentally tough. And philosophy and mindset it's the foundation because it's really something that allows us to have a mental model of the world, our own mental model of the world. It really becomes our personal operating system. And the reason there's a fortress in the background on this slide is that this really represents something that is within all of us. We all have this inner fortress or inner citadel, if you're familiar with Stoic philosophy, the ancient philosophy of the Greeks and the Romans. The notion of every person having this inner citadel or inner fortress really comes from that. And it's about how we look at the world. And it's about how we interpret things such as challenges, failure, mistakes, adversity, competition. And we want to make this our real foundation of mental toughness because it allows the other 2 levels of mental toughness to be performed more easily. Most mental toughness training programs don't talk about philosophy or mindset, or they think that kind of thing will simply just come after you've developed the character skills, the motivation, the behaviors and actions that you need. But I've actually found that it works in the opposite direction. So let me give you an example. Let's say your perception of stress is something that is bad. Well, whenever we're in a performance context, you're going to be under stress. You're going to be under pressure. And if you have a negative viewpoint or perception of stress, do you think that your character skills or your behaviors and actions will be as available to you as if you had a different perception of stress and pressure? So in that example, let's talk about an alternative viewpoint of stress and pressure. The reality is that we need stress and pressure in our lives. If we are all pursuing a performance context to become masters in that context, it's actually stress, pressure, challenges that take us to the next level. So by shying away from that, we're actually shying away from becoming a master or learning. And even though that stress or pressure may lead to failure, failing in that moment does not define you as a failure, right? You're just simply experiencing failure on your journey to becoming a master. So that's a very easy example of how one's philosophy, if you change it on something like stress, can then allow you to have the right character skills that you need in the moment. So let's say you're under stress and pressure. Can you stay focused? Well, if you're looking at it as something that this is good for me, yeah, you probably can. You probably can stay focused. You can be resilient. You can handle adversity much better. You can be persistent, stay motivated, stay intense. And then that will allow us to do the right behaviors and actions that go along with developing those character skills and strengths. So we want to make sure that we start with that philosophy piece in mind, and that's really going to allow us to more easily build mental toughness. So I want you to think about inside of you, you've got that inner citadel, you've got that inner fortress. And we want to make sure that you're building its foundation with really heavy, strong stone. And you're not building it with straw or as a house of cards, something that's easily blown over once you face some pressure. So we're going to talk today mostly about mental toughness in a performance context. But there are certain aspects of mental toughness that go more back to practice and the idea of how we should practice and deliberate practice so that we can get, to be that master of whatever it is we do. But I want to talk today more about how we can get into the zone more often or into flow. In sports, we talk more about being in the zone. In other contexts, we talk more about being in flow. And so really the two experts I'm going to quote from, in this area are Dr. Jim Loehr, who's a sports psychologist in Florida, and Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, and don't ask me to spell that. He wrote a book that all of you should look into called Flow, The Psychology of Optimal Experience. And we want to look at being in the zone or being in flow because this is where we do our best work. And I'll ask people generally, what does it feel like when you're in the zone? What does it feel like when you're in flow? And so I want to show you some of the common answers that we get here. This is from a study done by Dr. Jim Loehr, who's worked with thousands of elite athletes, and many of these characteristics you'll find in the flow studies as well. So these were the most common answers that he got in his surveys. And so I want you to compare what you see on the screen to how you feel when you're performing your best, right? So physically relaxed. So our muscles are typically a little bit more relaxed. We don't feel a lot of tension, okay? Mentally calm. To me, that's about your mind is quiet, really on almost automatic autopilot. There's not a lot of self-talk going on at this stage. We're not feeling anxious about anything. We're not worried about that. If we have worries, we've pushed them out of our mind. Our energy is good when we're in flow. We're generally optimistic. We believe in good outcomes while we're performing. It's enjoyable. Now that's certainly shared between both, athletics and other performance contexts. It's enjoyable to be in flow and doing what you're doing. But a necessary requirement of whatever it is that you're doing is that it is challenging to you. Not too challenging and not too boring, but there's kind of a zone there where we have to be challenged, but just not too much where we're beyond our skills. As I said earlier, it also feels like it's effortless and automatic. Our focus is good, we're highly alert, and we're very confident in what we're doing. We're in control of that aspect. So, one aspect of flow that is a little bit different, although I think athletes experience this too, is there can also be this distortion of time. And so if you've been in flow in whatever work that you do, you've probably noticed that perhaps time flies. With athletes, it's sometimes the opposite. They feel like things have slowed down, allowing them to be more in control of their performance and actually see things develop more slowly so that they can actually react and respond more quickly. Now, it's important to understand what it feels like to be in the zone or in flow because this represents a very specific physiology or body chemistry for all of us. And the reality is we want to get into flow more often. And maybe you're able to do that on a regular basis, but a lot of people are not. A lot of people, their trips to the zone or their trips to a flow experience tend to be more random, and they may not know how to replicate that. But since this is a very specific body chemistry for all of us, one thing that we can start to do is learn to intentionally manage our own physiology. So I want to give you kind of an alternate definition of mental toughness that's centered on this idea of being in flow or being in the zone. And so here it is. Mental toughness is really your ability to create and sustain being in the zone or in flow. And you're going to do that by taking control of your thoughts and your actions. And those thoughts and actions that we're going to talk about today have specific effects on our body chemistry, on our physiology. And at the bottom here of the slide, I've noted that there's a difference between responding and reacting. So one of the books that I've had some of my athletes read is called The Mindful Athlete by George Mumford. And in that book, he talks about how there's a moment where mental toughness lives. It lives between stimulus and action. So, as a quick example, if you're a football fan, what's that kind of moment in between? That's the moment in between when a play ends and the next one begins, right? In tennis, it's, when a point ends and the next one begins. In that moment, that is where mental toughness lives. And we all have a decision to make in that moment. Do we react to what has just happened, or do we respond to it? And the difference is reacting tends to be a much more emotional thing. We look at what has just happened in the past, and we have either a positive reaction or a negative reaction. And if we have, let's say, a negative reaction, and I go back to looking at what it looks like to be in the zone or in flow, my negative reaction probably starts to change almost every one of these characteristics in the wrong direction, right? I may become more tense. My self-talk may go up, so I'm no longer mentally calm. My anxiety starts to go up. All of these things start to go in the wrong direction. And if that goes on long enough, then we really have a problem, because it's often difficult to change your body chemistry back to where it needs to be once you've gone to a certain point. It can take up to 20 or 30 minutes to get it back to where you need to be. And depending on what you do, you may not have 20 to 30 minutes. So that's how reacting to something in the past can change our body chemistry and really be a mentally weak decision. But instead, could we look forward? Could we respond to whatever's just happened and now plan out our next action based on that, right? Sometimes it might just be keep doing what you're doing, right? Whatever just happened, so what? Move on, let's go. Other times it may require an adjustment. But when we respond, we have a better sense of what we are trying to do. We have a better sense of what we're trying to fulfill. As an athlete, winning the game is more important than being perfect, or it should be. So if winning the game is more important, then we're going to respond to that last situation rather than to simply react to the fact that maybe I made a mistake or we did something incorrectly. These things have an impact on our body chemistry. So in that moment where mental toughness lives, you want to keep in mind and value how you feel. You want to value that body chemistry, because for us to perform well, we have to feel well. So let's value that over perhaps maybe a mistake or even something great that you just did. We don't want to get on that emotional roller coaster. So I want to share 3 ways that you can begin to manage your body chemistry, manage your physiology, and they're really, really basic. You're going to see these things and you're like, oh, really, Brian, that basic? Yes, it is that basic. And it's so basic that you are all doing all 3 of these right now, whether you know it or not, whether you're bringing awareness to it or not. And that's actually the key word, is bringing awareness to these concepts. So let's look at these 3, and I'll talk through each one in detail, because these are really 3 of the 4 things that I want you to leave today with that you're going to put more awareness into. So the 3 keys to managing your physiology, getting into the zone, being mentally tough, are rhythmic breathing, what I call positive presence, and then your self-talk. So let's talk about rhythmic breathing first. So there are many aspects of our breath that we can control, and this is a great way to begin to control your physiology. And like I said, there are many aspects that you can take in terms of breathing. Meditation does a lot of this, but rhythmic breathing is a great way to do this. And I actually created this bar on the side here as a way to show you and demonstrate what rhythmic breathing is all about. So the bar goes up in 5 seconds, it comes down in 5 seconds. So you can really time your breaths with that. Take an inhale for 5 and an exhale for 5. And I'll just leave that running as I'm talking about the benefits of this, right? So adding some rhythm to your breath allows you to take a little bit more charge of your physiology and get it into a state of coherence. Really, coherence is all about connecting your mind and body when we're talking about that in a physiological way. So when we are feeling more coherent, feeling more connected, our brain, our mind, and our body are going to work better together. So as we're you're working on this rhythmic breathing, this 5 second in, 5 second out, and you can change that to other timings, but 5 is fairly easy from a beginner standpoint. What happens to our brains? Well, we automatically become more clear thinking and more perceptive, right? We're able to actually slow things down because we're actually controlling our heart rate. We're controlling the rhythm of our heart rate, really starting to control the rhythm of our brains. And it puts us into a state in which we can do better with problem solving. I'm sure in everything that you do, there are always problems that come up. And if we're not in control of the rhythm of our breath, if we're not in control of our physiology, we tend to be more stress reactive. And we may not be able to solve these problems, but we need to, right? So bringing some rhythm to your breath as even something that you can do at the beginning of the day or prior to your performance, it's a great way to get your mind configured to be able to solve problems, be more perceptive, and be more clear thinking. Now, the idea of positive presence, this is really speaking to your body language, right? So all of you are exhibiting some sort of body language right now, how you're sitting in your chair or maybe standing or whatever that is. You're showing it's really kind of a window into your emotions, into your physiology, how we carry ourselves. And you've probably, or at least heard of, but maybe some of you have seen Amy Cuddy's TED Talk on how body language defines who you are. So Amy Cuddy is a professor at Harvard Business School, and this is one of the more famous TED Talks. And in that TED Talk, she discusses power poses and distinguishes between high power poses and low power poses. And so she talks about an experiment that they did, and they brought people into their lab to really test the power of these power poses, both high and low. And so they had them spit into a vial to get a saliva sample. And then they had them do either a high power pose or a low power pose. And they demonstrated what these looked like. And, you know, in the picture here with Amy and Wonder Woman, that is one of the high power poses, right? You're standing in the Wonder Woman stance, so you can see the shoulders are back, the head is held high, being very open, as opposed to a low power pose, which would be really maybe having your arms folded across your chest, making yourself smaller. Putting your hand on your neck is often a sign of extreme low power. And the experiment was really designed to see, do these different poses have an effect on one's body chemistry and how they react to the world? So they had these people do those poses for 2 minutes. They then gave them an opportunity to gamble. And then they took another saliva sample, and that was the end of the experiment. So what did that experiment show? We're just going to look at the results for people in a high power pose. So number one is when you're in a high power pose, your risk tolerance went up significantly versus people who were in a low power pose. Now, this is often an important ingredient in performance, because if we aren't taking risks, if we aren't challenging ourselves, then we can't get better, right? We will plateau. We'll just kind of stay where we are. We need to stay challenged. So we need to take risks. And depending on whatever your performance context is, you know, for me, tennis is a big thing in my athletic career. If I don't take chances at times during a match, I'm not going to not only be a better player in the long term, but I may not even win today. I might need to take some chances just to create something during this performance. Rather than letting my opponent simply drive everything, perhaps I need to take some risks and start to get out there and drive what's happening on the court more. So we want us to be more risk tolerant. The next thing that they measured that went up was testosterone. So testosterone is a hormone that drives assertiveness. So we want to be more assertive during our performances, right? We don't want to be kind of the opposite of that, which would be meek, maybe doubting ourselves, right? We want to make sure that we're being assertive and confident in whatever it is that we do. And then the last factor that they measured was cortisol. Cortisol is another hormone that is typically called the stress hormone, sort of fight, flight, or freeze. And certainly in sports, we see a lot of the freezing aspect. People start to develop that deer in the headlights look. They get the blank stare. They don't know what to do. Problem solving goes away. Ability to control your muscles and your balance goes away. So this is definitely a hormone we want to be avoiding when it comes to a performance context. And when I talked earlier about how a reaction of getting upset, angry, frustrated at maybe some past mistake, this is the hormone that we are potentially introducing into our physiology. This is the hormone that can take between 20 and 30 minutes to get out of your system once you've kind of flooded your system with that. So we can see that by having these people come into their lab, simply stand in a power pose or even sit in a power pose for 2 minutes, we see these different changes. Okay. Now, if you go out to Google and do a search on this stuff, you'll see that some people since this time have refuted some of these hormonal changes. But the one thing I would ask you to do is to try it yourself. I've done this just for my own sort of athletic career, as well as even doing public speaking or working with athletes, and I have found that this definitely works for me. It absolutely helps me bring my best performances on a daily basis. So I would ask you to try this same thing, because what we're trying to establish is what we call a positive presence. How I want you to feel assertive, confident, comfortable. I want you to be able to think better under pressure. I want you to be proactive under pressure, right? And it's not just about standing, in a power pose, because wherever you are, it might look a little strange, right? That you're standing kind of in this superhero Wonder Woman power pose, for 2 minutes. Hey, what's he doing over there? What's she doing over there, right? There are other things that we can be doing that are much more subtle, but are super important to creating that positive presence. So in terms of whatever we do, we want to make sure that we are walking big, we're walking tall, we're standing tall, that we are projecting an image of confidence and strength and power. And so when I say be open and take up space, really the opposite of that is we don't want to be closed. We don't want to make ourselves small. We want to make ourselves big. We can also use our voices as a means of establishing some positive presence. So speak with confidence. So I'll often tell athletes, for instance, if you're saying the score, or if you're talking to one of your teammates, make sure you do that with some confidence, some assertiveness. Use your voice as part of your toolkit to establish that positive presence. So in whatever you do, be more aware of how you walk, how you stand, how you sit. What image are you projecting? Now, the most important person that you're projecting this image for is yourself. You want to make sure that you're doing this because you want to try to configure your brain and your body for optimal performance. Other people may read things into your body language, right? And that could be good, that could be bad. But ultimately, you're doing this for yourself. In sports, we do definitely talk about how this can have an effect on one's opponents. And that's good. If they're paying attention to that and you're projecting confidence, great. They may feel like, oh, man, I'm kind of worried about this person. She's unbreakable today. Just look at how she reacts to everything. She's always looking really confident, right? But ultimately, this is really about you first. So something to help you get started, with both rhythmic breathing and establishing a positive presence is this app that I like. It's a free app, available iOS, Android, so called Breathe to Relax. And it's really more of a stress management tool, but it has a breath pacer similar to the one that I created in PowerPoint for all of you today. And that breath pacer allows you to configure the length of the inhales and the exhales. It starts off at something like 7.2 seconds, which, that for me, when I first started, that was an eternity. I couldn't do that. So I knocked it down to 5 seconds. And so this is configurable. So this is something that you can use, at the beginning of your day or, perhaps before a performance as a way of getting your mind into the right place, right? And so I have lots of my students, use this app, but also use it while they're in a power pose, right? So get into the superhero pose, watch the screen, watch that breath pacer, and just go along with that, right? And then after the app does 16 breath cycles, it's about 3 minutes. After that, you're going to feel a lot better. Your brain is going to feel a lot better. Now, this is also very similar to meditation. So some of you may have a mindfulness or a meditation practice. And if you do, one thing that you'll notice is while they don't ask you to get into a power pose, they almost always tell you to have a straight back, right? So the straight back, power posing, really the same thing. So there are apps that you can use for some guided meditations, like Calm and Headspace, both of which have some free aspects to it, but they also have some premium plans. So I would definitely encourage you to start some of your rhythmic breathing and positive presence training by working on apps like Breathe to Relax, Calm, or Headspace. Now, the last aspect of you controlling your physiology is getting a handle on your self-talk. Now, this is a tricky one. This is probably the toughest one to change. So my message here would be, if you can get good with rhythmic breathing and positive presence, very often your self-talk can come along for the ride. But there's a lot of work to do here. So let's talk about what your self-talk should be like. Whether it is this way or not is another question, and we'll kind of maybe debunk some of the myths that go along with that. But self-talk I see in a similar way to either wise parenting or wise coaching. So Angela Duckworth, in her book Grit, talks about the idea of wise parenting and wise coaching as being completely supportive, right? So these characteristics that I have here on the left-hand side of the screen, being positive, motivating, encouraging, supportive, totally accepting, productive, simple self-talk, really self-talk that just shows love for that person, right? That's how we want to be with ourselves. But that doesn't mean we don't have high standards, right? So we want to have the two. We want to be completely supportive and accepting of ourselves. And if you're a parent or a coach, this is how you should treat children and the athletes that you work with or other performance. But you don't want to compromise on the high standards, right? So we want to make sure that our self-talk is the same, right? It has that very positive, motivating, encouraging, all those things, but doesn't give us a pass, right? If we truly want to achieve mental toughness or become a master of whatever it is that we do, we've got to maintain those high standards. So this is how we want to configure our self-talk. Now, most people do pretty well with the right-hand side, right? Most people say they've got high standards, and sometimes those standards are perfection, which is just not reality. But how we get there is important, right? So many people have a critical self-talk voice that generally only serves to make them feel bad when things don't go their way. And that self-talk is really, it's almost like a person who doesn't get it. They don't get that you're trying to work for the long term, that you're trying to become a master, and it's all about today. But the thing is, it's not about today. This journey that we're all on is almost interminable, right? There is no endpoint. Right? We can always be reaching new levels. So we want to make sure that your self-talk is like the positive coach that you want to have, the best coach that you want to have. So that is totally accepting of you, but also is keeping you to a certain standard. Now, being mentally tough is tough, right? Because I'm asking you actually to make some difficult decisions. Now, this slide looks pretty simple, right? It's really two scenarios, and most people fall into this top scenario where they are essentially being controlled by their environment. So, for example, let's say you're driving on your way to work and you get cut off on the highway by somebody. That typically, drives a certain reaction to that. Maybe you're upset, frustrated, right? Maybe puts you in a bad mood. And it could work on the opposite side. Maybe something great happens to you, right? And then you're all of a sudden in a good mood. But the trouble with this person on the top is they have become a function of whatever is happening around them, whatever the other people do, other events. Where instead, I think we'd all rather be more in control of who we are during the day. I think we'd all rather be able to choose our emotions, to choose our mood, and therefore choose how we want to breathe, choose what our body language looks like, choose how we talk to ourselves, regardless of what's going on. Because if we can do that, then we can really drive the quality of our day. Right? Where in the other circumstance, the events that are happening around us tend to drive our behavior, and then they tend to drive the quality of our day. I think we all want to strive to be the ones in charge of that aspect, right? So this is kind of like on a continuum. It's not that anybody's 100% at the top here or 100% at the bottom, but our goal should be to try to take more and more control. And this is where that distinction between reacting to what happens to us and responding to it becomes so important. Understanding where mental toughness lives, right? In that moment between stimulus and action. But this is tough. I think that's why, it sounds kind of cliche, but mental toughness is tough because it's asking you to make tough choices in those moments. When we think about developing mentally tough people, developing even a great competitor, and I left this competitor piece here because whatever it is you do in life, there's going to be an element of competition to it. Whether it's how other people are viewing you and your peers, or if you're in some sort of performance context where you actually are directly competing with each other. And this particular slide shows what I call the 9 competitive skills. And these are 9 observable competitive skills. And we're really starting with this bottom level, right? These are the 4 things I'm going to ask you to become more aware of. We've already talked about the first 3, positive presence, rhythmic breathing, and your productive self-talk, right? So as you become, more conscious, more aware of these things, I'm not expecting that you're going to all of a sudden be, 100% got that stuff, I've nailed it by the end of the week. But are you becoming more aware of it? Are you going from 0% awareness of your body language to say 10% by next week, maybe 25 the next, right? That's all we're trying to do is build awareness. The last one here, but is your energy and effort. And this is a fundamental level 1 skill of being a competitor, because without that, we're not engaged. Without that, there is no improvement. So we want to be able to demonstrate this to show our level of engagement. And it should be high at all times. It shouldn't just be, we have high effort sometimes and then other parts of the day we don't, right? That's not how we get better. That's not how we master anything. So if I came to wherever it is that you do what you do, I would be able to observe all of these things. Now the self-talk, you might say, well, I can't get in your head. That's true. But I could listen to how you talk to other people. And I could, based on tone, based on content, really understand, is your self-talk, is how you talk, is that positive, motivating, right? I'd be able to get in there. So we want to make sure that we are doing these specific behaviors, because I think that's key for any training program, is that you can talk about concepts, but if you can't break it down to specific behaviors that you need to do all of the time, then there's too much left open to interpretation. And I think that was part of the problem I had faced as a younger athlete, is I was given some things to think about, like in tennis, we often say play 1 point at a time. That sounds great, but I have no idea how to do that, right? So because it wasn't broken down into specific behaviors like these. Now, I'm not even going to get into the other behaviors that are here, but they're higher level because you can't really achieve doing those things until you have set the foundation of these 4 things. So these are going to be your takeaways: positive presence, rhythmic breathing, productive self-talk, and monitoring your energy and your effort. Because ultimately, we all want to become mentally tougher. We want to become, better competitors. We want to become better at whatever it is that we do. And of course, we want to start with those basic behaviors. I would also say that if you're really interested in doing more on this, taking maybe mental toughness training to a whole nother level, you want to think in terms of these 5 categories: philosophy, motivation, mental, emotional, and physical. These go into everything that we do. It doesn't matter if you're doing a sport, playing a musical instrument, working in an office, a manager, a leader. We want to have first look into that philosophy piece. We want to develop your own personal philosophy, your own personal operating system, because that's going to really help you understand the world around you in a better way that is going to allow you to become your best. The next piece is motivation, understanding why you do what you do. What's the purpose of it? I know in my previous career, I used to be in software development. I didn't really get why I did it. And that's why I don't do that anymore. In 2009, I stopped doing that, and I started doing this because this felt like such more of a fulfilling and purposeful way of leading my life. On the mental side, we want to develop skills like focus, critical thinking. Emotionally, we want to start moving toward being more positive than negative, really setting up a ratio of 3-to-1 or 5-to-1 positive thoughts to negative ones, right? That's where optimal performance happens. And I would also say that confidence is an emotional thing. So we want to learn to treat confidence as a skill and not just see it as something that comes and goes with, results. Results are certainly a part of confidence, but it's not the end-all be-all. And then the last piece is the physical piece, because your physical energy, whether you realize or not, drives everything. How much you sleep, the kinds of food you eat, your hydration, your general health, your fitness, your strength and conditioning. And, for example, let's say you only got 2 hours of sleep last night. Well, what do you think that does to your emotional game? You're probably a little bit more irritable, a little more grouchy on a day like that. You won't be able to focus nearly as well. Your motivation won't be where you need it to be in order to persist and perform. And so we got to realize that paying attention to these fundamentals of eating, sleeping, and moving are super important to being mentally tough, right? To being good at whatever it is, because whatever it is you do, you want to make sure that you're bringing the maximum amount of energy that you can to that event, to that meeting, to whatever it is. Otherwise, you're not going to perform nearly as well as you could. So we've got to learn to not only do all these things well, but then also manage our schedule in such a way that we can be recovering energy, relaxing a little bit, so that we can gear up for that next moment. So let me just summarize. I think we're coming up on our 45-minute mark. So mental toughness, our definition here is now the ability to create and sustain being in flow, being in zone. And we do that by taking control of our thoughts and our actions, right? And that begins with our basics: rhythmic breathing, positive presence, productive self-talk, maybe a little bit different than positive self-talk, and then our energy and effort. And I think the key for all of you is to see these as skills. As I said earlier, mental toughness in the past was always looked at as something you either had or you didn't. And we know that that's not true. But if you look at this as training and really start to break down those 5 training areas into smaller and smaller things that you can work at, then you will absolutely make some improvement. So view this as training. So Drew, with that, I'd like to turn it back to you to see if we have any questions that our participants have.
Great. Well, thank you so much for that insightful presentation. And we do have plenty of time for questions. So alumni on the call, if you want to go ahead and type in some questions. We got some really positive feedback. Someone just said really awesome talk. Thank you. And let's see if any other questions come in. Oh, someone asked how can their son hear this presentation. We are recording it, so probably either this afternoon or later this week, I will send a follow-up email to everyone that has a link to this presentation. Okay, someone has a question about power poses. They didn't ask a question. So here's another one. What are the tips to use your breath to relax your muscles?
Yeah, I think what I would actually say there is a combination of using your breath like with the rhythmic breathing, but also there are some great guided meditations that are called body scan meditations. So the app Calm, or their website calm.com, has some body scan meditations which essentially help you just kind of think from head to toe and think into each one of those areas and begin to relax. This is a great way to warm up for something, especially if you do something physical. And they have 3-minute versions, 5-minute versions. So I do this with some of the tennis teams that I work with. We'll actually go through that meditation before we play. So we use our breath as a means of relaxing, but then the guided meditation walks us through from your head to your feet, and actually helps you connect and communicate with those parts of your body, and maybe notice some tension you didn't even know you had, and being able to release that. I think, as you know, this is one of those things, if you haven't done anything like yoga or massage or things like that, we're not always that good at communicating with our muscles and helping them reduce tension and stress. So I think that would be a really good thing to look into, is body scan meditation.
Okay, great. Here's the power pose question. In the tennis example, how do you look powerful after losing the point?
Ha! All right. So this comes back a little bit to philosophy as well, right? So when you've lost a point, have you really lost anything that counts on the scoreboard? Most likely not, right? Because the only scoreboard that counts are the sets. You know, when we're trying to win, essentially we're trying to win 2 sets, right? We either win 2-0 or 2-1. And so if you can get your head around the fact that losing a point doesn't mean you've actually lost anything, points are more a means to an end, it's about the next point, right? So my philosophy in tennis is the most important point in a tennis match is the next one. So I maintain essentially a very similar response after every point. So something I teach my athletes is, with tennis, is you take the racket out of your dominant hand, you put it in your non-dominant hand and carry the racket at your throat. You then take your dominant hand thumb and press it to your vibration dampener or just to your strings as a means of a reset button. And this little physical response or routine done immediately after a point helps the athlete move on from whatever just happened, right? You're supposed to do something, so it gets you to get your mind off of that, moves on to something else. And we've actually videoed players doing this, and then we show them the video, you know, and ask them, okay, what does it look like? What kind of image do you think you're projecting when you do this, even after you lose a point? And they're like, oh, I look really calm. It looks like I was able to move beyond that last point. Oh, that pose looks actually really confident. And then when they see themselves doing this for point after point after point, I ask them, okay, what do you think your opponent's thinking now, right? Because you're always reacting the same way to even lost points. And their response is, well, they're probably thinking that I'm unbreakable, right? That it's going to be really tough to beat this guy today because no matter what happens, he's always got a productive, confident response. So try that.
Great. And here's another one. Do you have a website with online resources?
Yes, my website, performancextra.com. I do have some online training programs. I'm actually going to be launching an online course probably over the summer that people can sign up for. So there will be more information at my website, as well as, you know, I have a Twitter account at Performance Extra. So all of that will be announced there.
Yeah, no, we'll definitely plug the website and your Twitter in our follow-up email that everyone can be looking forward to.
Great, thank you, Drew.
I'll give it just another second. If anyone has any other questions, feel free to type those in. We'll give it just another minute here. Someone wrote in, Brian, and said, thanks for the calm suggestion.
Okay.
All right, well, it looks like that's all the questions. So, Brian, thanks again. Everyone, be looking forward to the follow-up email, and I'll also include a little evaluation in that, and we'd appreciate your feedback on today's presentation. But other than that, I hope everyone has a great rest of your day, and we will be in touch soon.